Following the assassination of Jorge Eliecer Gaitan, left-wing liberal leader, the setting of the 9th International Conference of American States, trying to solve Latin American economy and forge mutual defense against communism, flares into violence.
1, 2, 3. Top of the new year to ya. Hello, baby gang. It's Elliot. Let's talk about Encanto. Good movie, right? Huh? Made you cry, didn't it? Awesome. Today, let's talk about colonialism and trauma. Some of you might know that I am a first-generation Dominican Chinese American. That's a lot of words. With that said, my experience being the child of Latino immigrants is quite similar to others. My family needs therapy. I won't get into details cause duh, but there's a general experience shared by people like me, born to people from essentially a whole other world, escaping poverty and building a new cozy life in the United States. We don't very much understand our elders, for one. They often hold troubling views on social issues, on economics, on your romantic life, if you have one. Many immigrant kids develop contentious relationships with their parents that scar them emotionally and disturb their ability to have healthy relationships for the rest of their lives. And so, whenever wholesome animated movies come out talking about familial issues and emotional issues we are familiar with, we go to the movie theater, sob our hearts out from the opening moment of the movie to the end of the movie, then continue to bottle our emotions up the whole time wondering why we're so depressed and anxious all the time. Nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong. Disney's Encanto is our latest forlorn fest. It's a Walt Disney animation film released on Disney Plus to critical acclaim and social media buzz. And I think that of all the animated films I've cried to, personally this one might have the most to unpack, socially, psychologically, familially. So today I'm going to unpack. I will discuss how trauma experienced by Latin American immigrant families as a result of imperialist exploitation carries on through generations through the lens of Encanto. And then we'll discuss how that manifests in the lives of us as the next generation of these families, and how we're traumatized not just by our families but with them, and how we can heal. Let's start. Part 1. Analyzing Encanto. Spoiler alert! Summary time. Spoilers ahead. Okay, I honestly really did enjoy the movie. The only thing I wasn't the biggest fan of was honestly the music, and I know what people are gonna say, and yes, there are bangers on here. There's some great music in here, but the Lin-Manuel Miranda stuff, look, I used to be a huge fan of In the Heights, a huge stan back in my musical theater geek days, and I just feel like some of his his Miranda-isms are just like kind of getting old. The hip-hop Harry rap style, just because it has polysyllabics doesn't mean it's worth writing rap style. The weirdly over-enunciated consonants. Yeah, all of it gets grating. There's even a part in the first number where they do this, they sing like Isabella or whatever, and it's the same like, oh, we were singing the pretty girl's name thing that he's done in like every show he's ever written. And at that point, I was like, am I going to have to stop watching this movie? Am I going to have to stop watching this movie during the first number? But I didn't. And I'm glad. And look, there were some bops here. Dos Oruguitas, beautiful. The We Don't Talk About Bruno song, great song. Loved it. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. So Encanto is set in a type of pre-modern Colombian village wherein a couple and their newborn babies are forced to flee their village during an armed conflict. In their escape, for some confusing and unexplained reason, the father, Pedro, sacrifices himself. It's not clear what him giving himself up actually does to save the others. It's not like he buys them time, because she clearly watches him die and falls to the floor sobbing, which that's when the magic candle pops up. But like, then like, what happens? Do they just walk away, or they? Anyway, Abuela Pedro dies for the sake of the family, but a magical candle leads Abuela Alma and the family to safety, to a magical castle called La Casita with autonomous objects. Each member of the family is given a magical superhuman power when they come of age. Antonio, who I would die for, gets the power to communicate with animals. However, our main character, Mirabel, never gets a superpower, and this devastates her. She watches as her massive family, including her cool sisters, super strong Luisa and flower princess Isabela, set up elaborate events, and she tries to help but only seems to get in the way. One day, Mirabel notices the house is starting to break apart, and she tries to do something but is constantly met with disapproval from her abuela, who has the look, mind you, of the kind of abuela I would stay away from forever, like the least trustworthy, most evil looking abuela. This leads her to learn about her estranged uncle Bruno, who had the power to see the future but was ostracized because his vision seemed constantly negative. Bruno is said to have left the casita, but Mirabel finds him hiding in a hidden room, shabby, skeptical, but heartbroken at missing his family. She makes him complete a vision, which seems at first to suggest that Mirabel is going to destroy the casita. Why did I say it like that? But when viewed fully, shows Mirabel can heal the secretly decaying castle if she bonds with her sister, Isabela. So she does, and then this absolute monster, Abuela Alma, who has been shadily outcasting Mirabel from the family her whole life and is constantly putting each of her family members under heavy pressure to use their superpowers to achieve some degree of perfection and keep the casita running, scolds Mirabel and tells her she's ruining the casita. Mirabel then says Alma is ruining the casita. I was so tense and angry during the scene. My ears were hot, and I had to sit back, and I was like, wait, am I angry? Am I angry at a movie, a Disney movie? And I was like, well, I'm not angry at the movie, I'm angry at the feeling. It was capturing a feeling. We'll get into it. The casita falls apart in ruins, and Mirabel runs away. Then Abuela Alma eventually finds her and apologizes, admitting that her trauma has caused her to bitterly fight tooth and nail to keep the security and prosperity she feels unworthy of in the first place, because it's a prosperity that was just miraculously brought to her after everything in her world fell apart and the love of her life was murdered in front of her. She makes everything right, and the Madrigals work together happily to build a new unmagical casa, with the help of the villagers who they've helped for years in that area. As the new casita finally is completed, Mirabel, essentially becoming Alma's successor as the heart of the casita, opens it up, and what do you know? She turned it into magic again. Woo! End of the movie. Ugh. Man, summaries are hard. I want to talk about a few scenes that resonate with real-world Latin American experiences, starting from the very top. The armed conflict that results in Pedro's death is not really explained. It's more just hand-waved with like abstract descriptions. Oh, when they came and da-da-da. We don't have context for it, and yet it worked really well for me as a signifier of the weight of everything. Because as Latin people, or as immigrants overall, we kind of already know exactly what that armed conflict is, or what it means, because so many of our families have lived through it. We'll touch on more historicization in the next section, pushes up classes, but briefly, I'll say that it's kind of a perfect setup for the conflict at hand, because it shows how people from war-torn areas of poverty, etc., begin their struggles with trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. These words aren't used in the film, but they're accurate when it comes to describing Abuela Alma's whole thing, and as we'll discuss, the effect it has on her family. Alma, despite being surrounded by love and fortune, is constantly stressed and disdainful. She freaks out when things don't go perfectly. She acts this way because the pain of losing another loved one or failing her family would be too much for her to bear. In her fear and bitterness, she ends up pushing away her loved ones anyway. She recreates her traumatizing struggle in her ostracization of Bruno, who she loses because she still fears the unknown, the powerful outside force that can destroy everything. Once, it was the invaders of her village, but now it's Bruno's clairvoyance. She doubles down in stubbornness towards him because accepting her cyclical traumatization would be too much to bear. Briefly, let's talk about Bruno. Get it? Because there's always that one uncle, you know. Immigrant families always at least have one person that's like the black sheep, the person who was destroying the family, and we don't talk about it anymore. We push them away. Usually it's because somebody was stealing money from somebody or got in a big fight or said something, whatever. And Bruno in this case is more of like the skeptical, like kind of weird outcast. He sees things that the rest of the family just aren't prepared to see. And this is also really real. Many of us Scroll. Many of us growing up in Latin families begin to see that the idealized world we're told of, where we work hard, get a great career, and bring the family to even more unending success while we all love each other and stay together forever, is not really real. But even seeing small-scale problems in our family, like ignorant social views or spending habits, is alarming. We're often boxed out as rebellious or hormonal teens, while the elders we criticize do nothing to listen to us or appreciate our differing views. Bruno was different, not evil, and the Madrigals just couldn't tell the difference. Because being different and being imperfect is just not accepted in a highly pressurized environment. A highly pressurized environment requires that every person involved conforms diligently. Maribel connects so powerfully with Bruno because she is ostracized and boxed out as well. She's told to just stay out of everyone's way because she has no superpower. When she has concerns or ideas, her abuela just shuns her, and the rest kind of follow suit. For instance, Mirabel's parents, the kind-hearted Julieta and Agustin, do what they can to balance Abuela Alma's interests with those of her children. But ultimately, they're not able to give Maribel the support she needs because they're only really placating Abuela Alma's pressure on their children instead of resisting it. This results in each of their children being deeply insecure. Luisa feels she has to be strong at all times and that she'll never be strong enough. Isabela feels like she has to stand around and be pretty but express no autonomy, merely carrying out the family's wishes even if it means marrying Maluma. And it all comes back to Abuela Alma. To be honest, I couldn't stand her during the movie because I felt that very real characterization. All of us as immigrant kids know of or deal with the matriarchs and patriarchs who pressure everyone in their family to conform. Very often we feel our life isn't ours and that we've never been seen or loved for who we are because from birth we've been put into a system. We may be told we can be ourselves, but every time we are ourselves, we're ignored, chastised, or punished, and we're constantly pressured, aside from that, to make the family proud. But as Alma's character progresses, we begin to understand that she is not a villain. She's never had access to the resources that she needed to process her trauma and become healthy mentally and emotionally. Nobody was there to let her be herself or teach her fancy terms like neuroplasticity. She never even had time to realize how broken she was. Her whole life was one in which conformity and stress felt necessary to survive. And this all happens because of the real villain of Encanto, which is the traumatization of Latin Americans. Eduardo Galeano's book, The Open Veins of Latin America, starts with a very famous passage. The division of labor among nations is that some specialize in winning and others in losing. Our part of the world, known today as Latin America, was precocious. It has specialized in losing ever since those remote times when Renaissance Europeans ventured across the ocean and buried their teeth in the throats of the Indian civilizations. Centuries passed and Latin America perfected its role. We are no longer in the era of marvels when faith surpassed fable and the imagination was shamed by the trophies of conquest, the loads of gold, the mountains of silver. But our region still worked as a menial. It continues to exist at the service of others' needs, as a source and reserve of oil and iron, of copper and meat, of fruit and coffee, the raw materials and foods destined for rich countries which profit more from consuming them than Latin America does from producing them. Surprise, surprise, kids, Latin America was colonized. We all know the basics of the Reconquista, about the devastation of indigenous tribes across the Americas, the encomiendas, and the Atlantic slave trade, but we don't actually process as Latina people how these things affect everything we go through. If you're Dominican like me, your grandparents or maybe even parents lived through the brutal white supremacist regime of Rafael Trujillo. And you'll come across people, sometimes in your own family, sometimes at school, who low-key or even high-key still justify Rafael Trujillo's actions because economics. Which is funny to me because I thought economics, capitalist economics, were so great because they're so malleable and so simple because it's all down to supply and demand. And then it's so then when people are murdered in the millions, innocent people just slaughtered, it's well, you had to do that because of capitalist economics. Well, it's why? I thought we were doing trade. I thought we were trading goods. Are you telling me the goods are people? Yes. Colombia itself has a history, a messy history of political struggle. Though technically independent for almost 2 centuries, the liberal and conservative parties emerging from the legacy of Bolívar and Santander have constantly been in violent conflict, leading to decades of civil wars and domestic terrorism. All the while, the United States continued to profit off of Colombian people and products and exercised violence over the country to preserve pro-US anti-communist sentiment. From Imperialism by Another Name by Grace Lee. Circumstantial connections between narco-traffickers and Latin American guerrillas were exploited in order to maximize national sentiment and domestic support for increased interventions in countries such as Colombia. Importantly, much like in its general Cold War efforts, the goal was to encourage, persuade, bribe, or coerce foreign governments into aiding US action with minimal consideration for their national circumstances. In Colombia, this took the form of increased American support for counterinsurgency activity despite an ongoing peace process and ceasefire between the government and the FARC in 1984. By sending in more than US $50 million in arms that year and trading 4,844 Colombian personnel between 1984 and 1990, the US severely undermined any chances of a stable democracy developing in the country. Another striking example of American disregard for democratic stability in Colombia would follow in 1986 when the CIA joined the Colombian military in implementing the Condor Plan to eliminate all progressives, liberals, and revolutionaries in the country. Repeated American-backed interventions against the FARC during this time were often justified during the guise of the drug war. However, they were evidently aimed at preserving American interests and keeping non-reformist leaders in power. Encanto is set in a nation that was massacred and exploited by Europeans for centuries, and it is still subject to the desires of imperialist powers to this day. The armed conflict that takes Pedro's life makes no direct reference to that, but any Latina person can connect it with any real armed conflict that has come directly or indirectly as a result of that imperialism. Cultures are erased, peoples are enslaved, many innocent lives are taken. And poor Latin Americans suffer from tremendous trauma from young ages as a result. I remember my dad telling me about his dad walking outside once during the overthrow of Trujillo and a bullet whizzing by his head and him being like, let me get back inside. These are the things our ancestors went through and that our grandparents and parents have gone through. And even when they aren't hurting others through negligence or ignorance originating from this trauma, their experiences have a significant subconscious effect on their loved ones. An article by Bako and Zana explores what they term transgenerational trauma, or the transgenerational atmosphere. Not or, and. Traumatic experience deeply shocks the traumatized person's feeling of security in the world. In a condition of shock, victims of trauma feel that they are unable to speak about the sufferings they have endured. In cases of trauma affecting a whole community, the traumatic effect, as pointed out by Prager, can go even deeper, especially when the transmission by narrative is forbidden. Traumatized persons may create an internal world where sufferings are elaborated only in a selective manner. In this intrasubjective process, felt threats to security gain a permanent quality that keep individuals in a condition of permanent readiness. This experience will express itself in the body, in memory, and in actions, and thus form an atmosphere that will become transgenerational. Survivors wordlessly make family members witnesses to their experiences against their intention and without either the survivor or the family having any clear insight into the process. At one point in the article, a therapy subject is described to be experiencing nightmares of child abuse, and upon confessing this to his mother, the mother reveals she's suffered from similar dreams and was actually a victim of child abuse in her own life, but not the son. Therapy subjects crying in agony, recounting their experiences living through these tremendous political tragedies, leave a lasting impact on those within earshot at the therapy offices, the therapists themselves having to take huge breaks to process everything. This all points to the general idea that even when our families are not directly telling us or showing us pain that they've experienced from this trauma, we are still experiencing it with them through the atmosphere they inhibit. We know somewhere within us the suffering they endure. It's passed into us like DNA. The experience of previous generations, the child can be torn from the helpless and vulnerable mother, persists as a reality in the present. Although the patient's reality testing is otherwise intact, certain situations and news, uncommon or common, true or untrue, may elicit severe, nearly psychotic regression. The survivor knows feelings of helplessness and defenselessness, but they are disproportionate to or untraceable within the individual life story. Conclusion. Confrontation and healing. Wow, lots of dark, sad things. Pretty cool, huh? I'd like to conclude this essay with some ideas about how we can deal with these issues in our own lives instead of just talking about sad things and then saying, go experience this bad stuff I just told you about. Think about it for a while. Let's have some direction, maybe. I'll try to give some ideas. I'm gonna tap into some spirituality and some folksy wisdom, but feel free to make material and psychological analyses of these ideas too, because I think that they'll track. In 2022, I want all of us to think about healing our inner child. This is an idea explored by many, but I'm particularly drawn to Buddhist monk and activist Thich Nhat Hanh and his particular explorations in a book called Reconciliation: Healing the Inner Child. I found this text just searching for healing ideas in response to all this stuff, and it resonated eerily well. Like, check out this passage. With practice, we can see that our wounded child is not only us. Our wounded child may represent several generations. Our mother may have suffered throughout her life. Our father may have suffered. Perhaps our parents weren't able to look after the wounded child in themselves. So when we are embracing the wounded child in us, we're embracing all the wounded children of our past generations. This practice is not a practice for ourselves alone, but for numberless generations of ancestors and descendants. Our ancestors may not have known how to care for their wounded child within, so they transmitted their wounded child to us. Our practice is to end this cycle. If we can heal our wounded child, we will not only liberate ourselves, but we will also help liberate whoever has hurt or abused us. The abuser may also have been the victim of abuse. There are people who have practiced with their inner child for a long time, who have had a lessening of their suffering and experienced transformation. Their relationships with their family and friends have become much easier. Pretty cool, huh? We don't get perfect fairy tale moments reconciling our families and our lives like the ones that happen in Encanto and other movies. Cycles of family trauma are not solved in a song and dance number in a 1-hour window. But the film does illustrate some simple, solid tenets to follow in this process. Now, I'm not one to just suggest that, like Mirabel and Alma, you should just forgive people who hurt you. You can choose to forgive, you can choose not to forgive. It's no 100% zero tolerance thing, but you have to move on. You have to move on, and you have to reconcile with the people that are worth reconciling with, and understand that they're not going to change overnight, but that there are reasons that they do the things that they do. And that if you can empathize with them, at least to some degree, you can have a better relationship with them, and you can forgive them more easily if you want to when they are not the best, when they are hurting you, and more clearly communicate it to them and let them know more clearly and more effectively what it is they're doing wrong, because you know what place they're coming from. But how do we move on in general? Taking time out with yourself is important, for one. Avoiding distractions is important. Remembering you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions, you're you, and you have thoughts and emotions. They're in your possession, and you should stay mindful and accept your situation and your thoughts and your emotions, because acceptance is the first key to change, to making a step in the right direction. Forcing yourself to feel different and being mad at yourself for feeling things and for thinking things, and forcing others to do things and forcing others to feel and think things is even worse than forcing yourself. It's all just bad. That's the exact kind of tyranny that we experience when we are young. People forcing us to feel things, forcing us to think things, ostracizing us, hurting us when we don't do those things. And so when we feel like doing that to others, really that's just the institutionalization. That's just us repeating the cycle because we were hurt and now we want to hurt others in the same way. But don't do that, and don't hurt yourself in the same way that others have hurt you. Same damn thing. You're also a person. But maybe more than anything I can offer right now, I think understanding is key. I think films like... what's the name of this movie? Films like Encanto do really well to remind us that families fought their battles before we came around, and that we're not the special recipients of their horrible evilness. We're people that came into a fucked up situation that everybody's just trying to make sense of. Those who are hurting you came from hurt backgrounds. When they're your parents and your uncles, it's tempting to feel like they're in charge, that you're supposed to listen to everything that they say, that their words mean more, that they're superheroes, that they have super magical powers. But even magic can only do so much. The rest is up to us. Thanks. Hey, let me mention that I have a Patreon. Well, my gang has a Patreon, Baby Gang. It's patreon.com/babygang, and for $2 a month you can help us make video essays on this channel and also on our magazine channel, Baby Gang Mag, where we will sometimes do group live streams. I also stream on here at times, and if you want notifications on when we'll go live, when I'll go live, when new videos are up, when events are happening, check out our Discord server in the description. If you're not interested in judging other people for being different from you, and you're interested in learning and just having a nice chill time on the internet, then go there. I hope it'll measure up to those expectations. Drink water and watch Encanto if this interested you and you haven't watched it yet. Spoilers are meaningless. You don't have to know how the movie ends. You can enjoy it no matter what, because film is so much more than just the thing that happens in the film. Fuck, man. Fucking heal. It's 2022. Isn't it time to heal? Good night. It's 4 a.m.